Hello and welcome to IO Ideas. This is our 9th year of IO Ideas, an event that explores topics that are important to Iowans. We're excited for we've almost finished our first day of discussion and we're excited for continued discussions tomorrow. The Gazette would like to give a special thank you to our presenting sponsor, ITC Midwest, for their support of this event and ensuring it remains free to all attendees. Today, we will be discussing diversity, equity, and inclusion in education. My name is Grace King, and I'm the K-12 education reporter here at the Gazette. Today, I am joined by our panelists, Dr. Ryan Wise, Dean of the Drake University School of Education and former director of the Iowa Department of Education, and Dr. Ruth White, founder and executive director of the Academy for Scholastic and Personal Success, which I will let her explain to you through our conversation. So thank you both for being here today. To our audience, you can submit questions by popping them into the chat and we will work them into our conversation. All right, so in schools today, diversity, equity, and inclusion is largely absent now due to federal policies under the Trump administration. The U.S. Department of Education has launched initiatives to eliminate DEI programs and has a portal for reporting discriminatory practices based on race or sex. What does this shift in classrooms mean for K-12 and higher education, and how do we continue to support students? So let's start just by defining what diversity, equity, inclusion is and what it isn't. Dr. White, would you like to start?
Sure. Yes, diversity, of course, has to do with the variety of students in a classroom or in a space. So that in Iowa, you may or may not be aware that there are 97% Caucasians, 3%, 4% African American, and then all of the other minorities or ethnicities fall under that number. So it is interesting and important from my perspective that there be diversity in classrooms. As a classroom teacher, I have taught classes in which there was no diversity, and have taught classes in which the diversity was largely instituted by me, when I would say, you need to be in this class, so come and enroll. So I think it's important to acknowledge and to honor diversity where it exists. Equity and equality are often spoken about in the same sentence. Equality means providing the same resources for everybody, regardless of race, color, creed, ability, all of that. And equity has to do with taking into account a person's background and providing resources that allow that person to achieve or to rise or to succeed. So, nutshell, that's diversity and equity. Inclusion, in just allowing a student to feel as though he or she has a place in the class, in the space, in the club, on the team, whatever it is. And that could be tricky depending on who is in leadership, but it's important for young people to have a feeling that they belong in whatever the space is.
You mentioned when you were a classroom teacher, you encouraged students to enroll in some classes. What classes were you trying to get better representation in? What do you mean by that?
Well, I taught humanities and advanced placement literature. And in my experience at that time, and I will stop saying in the last century, but it was a while ago, there were students who were bright enough to be in an AP class, but who were afraid to be in an AP class. And when I, as academic advisor to minority students, as well as the teacher of AP literature, one of the teachers of AP literature would say, why don't you enroll in this? This would be good for you. You'd learn so much more, and on and on and on. They'd say, that's not for me. I'm not smart enough. I don't belong in that class. Belonging. And so I would have to take them by the coattail, almost sometimes physically, but certainly metaphorically, and say, you need to enroll in this class. You don't know what you don't know until you know it. So come and give it a try. It may open a door for you. You'll have perspectives that you haven't had before. It will allow you to think differently, and on and on. So I had to do that a lot because I was in charge of tracking the achievement of minority students. And I knew that there were students who were totally capable of achieving in an advanced placement class. Now, whether or not they wanted to take the AP exam is a whole different thing, because that requires a whole different set of skills. But to read and interpret literature across the board certainly was well within the wheelhouse of many, many, many students who would have been just as satisfied not to take a course like that. So
I want to learn more about your role as an advisor to, did you say minority students?
Academic advisor to minority students was the title, yes.
Yeah, but before we talk about that, I want to ask Dr. Wise, do you have anything to add about what DEI means from the university perspective?
Yeah. So, well, first I would just say, Grace, thank you for having me on this panel today. It's a pleasure to be on it, and I really appreciate people joining in a very busy time of year, but on a really important topic. And so, hearing Dr. White speak, I would absolutely agree with everything she said. And just to add to that, when I think holistically about DEI, right, it's about creating a learning environment where every student feels, as Dr. White said, that sense of belonging, right, that they belong where they are, and they have the opportunity to succeed. I think that's central to this whole enterprise, right? When we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think, you said in your question, Grace, what is it not, right? It's not about exclusion or indoctrination or favoritism, right? It really does get to that sense of purpose, that sense of belonging, that feeling that I have the ability to succeed. And so, hearing you break it down, Dr. White, into each component, I would agree, right? Diversity, having lots of different perspectives at the table, people from different backgrounds with different experiences. Equity, not every student starts from the same place, right? So we have to give each student what they individually need to be successful. And then inclusion really gets to those values of, respect and safety, and every student feeling valued. And so, when I think about our work here at Drake, everything that we might put under that banner of diversity, equity, and inclusion is about benefiting all students, right? And preparing each of them to live and work and succeed in an increasingly diverse world.
We know Iowa is a predominantly white state, but maybe we could look at a historical lens of why do students of color, students from various backgrounds, might not see themselves in what could be considered a higher achieving classroom?
Is that for me?
Sure, Dr. White, yeah.
Why students might be reluctant, or why students might not see themselves in a predominantly white classroom? Well, the short answer and the simple answer is because there is no one else in that classroom. I cannot tell you how many times, up to and including 2025, students have said, I feel funny walking into that room because there's no one else in there that looks like me. I cannot tell you how many times I have heard a student say, when we are reading a novel, Huckleberry Finn, for example, and we read the N word, everybody's head turns and looks at me because I'm the only person who looks like me in the room. And that's daunting. For a student who is 15, 16 years old, I don't know how many students have been prepared for that kind of interaction. And so I don't blame them for being reluctant. But I think that reluctance should be seen as a challenge. With good leadership, with good teaching, with positive incentives, students could be encouraged to go ahead and try it. Like I said, with the AP class, try it. You won't know what you might learn unless you have tried. And if you don't try, then that door of opportunity will close and you'll still be on the other side of it. So,
Dr. White, this might be a good opportunity for you to talk about the Academy for Scholastic and Personal Success.
Okay, well, I was working at Washington High School as academic advisor to minority students when I got the idea of establishing the Academy. And in a nutshell, it was because of students like those that I've just described, students who are totally capable, who could think, were thinkers, but who had not planned, who had not been encouraged to plan either in school or at home, so that going to school was just an exercise, and until they graduated, and then there was no plan post graduation. So my interactions with these young people revealed to me, and of course I was right, that they had no sense of belonging in that space. They did not know who they were. They did not know where they came from. They did not understand the legacy of people of color, Black people in particular, in this country, in this state, in that school. And so they had no tether. They weren't connected to anything. And so the Academy was developed to give students an opportunity to experience rigorous education taught by people who look like them from a cultural perspective and on a college campus. All of those things have to be in place. And so students who joined the Academy learned that they, in fact, were bright, that they could achieve, and the idea was for them to take that newfound sense of confidence back to their home schools. They started as a freshman, started as a sophomore, started as a junior, back to their home schools so that they could increase their academic progress. And that's the nutshell.
So the primary program is a 6-week summer course for high school students taught on a college campus. Tell us about the ways your program has expanded over the years, serving middle, elementary schools, and even your critical conversations program.
Yeah, thanks for asking. The Academy started, I call it the mother program, the high school program, since that's where I was and that's where I could see these gaps. Did need to be taught on a college campus. That was one of our requirements. And we are now seated on the campus of Mount Mercy University. So that was the beginning. We began to understand, and when I say we, this program started with me and a colleague from the University of Iowa, who was at that time a graduate student in mechanical engineering. So that our curriculum was literature, history, math, and science. And so I could teach the literature and history, but I could not even get close to teaching math and science. So he and I became the duo. And so from that kind of humble beginning, and that was at Kirkwood when we started, by the way, we expanded first to elementary school. We thought, my goodness, if we're starting here at the end of a student's career, high school career, what greater impact could we have if we started earlier? So we did. It was just a matter of saying, let's do this. And then we did it. So we had a teacher who was willing to do that, who understood the rationale. And she happened to be teaching at Johnson's STEAM Academy. So that's how we started the elementary program. It's called the Academy Expansion. Later on, that was in 2006. Later on, 2019, just pre-COVID, we got from the district a program that they had started called African American Awareness, and we call it AAAP, and that's for middle school students. That program is seated in each of the middle schools. And all of the programs focus on skills, learning skills, challenging texts, and confidence building. So that when a little kid in third grade starts in the Academy Expansion, he has to or she has to learn how to sit still, how to listen, how to take notes, how to participate in class, and how to read, that kind of thing. Then we build on those skills in the middle school program, and then build even more so in the high school program. So at the end of that, end of each of those segments, there is a graduation or a celebration of achievement. And in the high school program, that celebration, it takes the form of travel to a place where where students can see African American or minority cultures in positive reflection. So they would say, and this is the honest truth, I've never seen a Black policeman before, for example. And so we'd say, oh, well, now you've seen one. And so it's not like, it shows how living in an environment where you are such an abject minority can skew your perspective on what is possible for you. Then once you see that, you say, oh, well, maybe I can do that too. So we do that, and we've done that for a long time. The most recent program we have kind of came out of the fact that we were teaching our high school students, and they would go home and talk to their parents, and their parents didn't know as much as the kids knew. So we decided that we should offer an experience for the community, free experience for the community, that would help them understand some of these issues as well. And we call it Critical Conversations. We're in our 6th season now. And as I said, it's free. We will be holding Critical Conversations in our new building space, or people can Zoom in as they wish. And we talk about things that are of import. And in our environment, current environment, of course, there are lots of issues that we can tackle. Our first session for this year is going to be on October 28th.
Great. And you're located in Cedar Rapids. What is your website? theacademysps.com.
Yeah.
If people want to find you there.
Yes.
And your program just last week was directly impacted by federal policies. Earlier this year, an executive order signed by President Donald Trump aimed to end racial indoctrination in K-12 schooling. And he cited the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination based on race, color, or national origin. Tell me how your program was impacted by this new federal policy.
Well, it was impacted in a kind of a knee-jerk way, insofar as our application for funding through the Cedar Rapids Community School District, along with 4 other community partners, we're one of 5 community partners, all apply for this funding, were approved on the consent agenda item on Monday, the last Monday a week ago. Before we could say yay, I received a phone call that said that our funding had been rescinded because of those the strictures placed on us by the Department of Ed and the Department of Civil Rights. They cited Title VI of the Civil Rights Act as the rationale, and indicated that because we serve Black and biracial students, we were discriminating against all other students. What they didn't know is that we've never discriminated, and that it is not our way, nor would we. We don't need the federal government to tell us that discrimination is not kosher. But they didn't ask us that. They just took the money. And so we are now in a position of having to attempt to recoup those funds and to adjust, pivot, make do, that kind of thing. The interesting aspect, there are many interesting aspects to this dilemma, but an interesting aspect is that when people see me now, they have that face like, oh, are you okay? And I'm saying, please, that we are not going away. I think the presumption is that if we don't have school district money, then we cannot operate. That's not the case. Of course, the funding is helpful. Certainly, it's helpful, but it's not the end all be all.
Yeah.
And I could go back in history and talk about how people who look like me have, overcome odds all along the way. But it is not something that we will capitulate to. We will, adjust. As a matter of fact, we're doing strategic planning this weekend.
So a large portion of your funding was essentially rescinded, and you are no longer able to have a presence in Cedar Rapids School District.
Yes, that's correct. The funding portion is damaging, but even more crucial is the fact that we will have to reevaluate how we recruit students, which had historically meant our going into the schools and speaking to a group of students. We are not able to do that anymore, to my knowledge. So we'll figure out another way.
Dr. Wise, can you talk about how anti-DEI policies are affecting teaching and programs at the university level?
Yeah. So, I think at the university level, obviously, it's a challenging time, right? So faculty are having to navigate a shifting and constantly evolving landscape. But really, at Drake, and I would think at all, higher ed institutions, our focus is on academic excellence, right? And so naturally, and let me make it specific so here at the School of Education, right, that I have the privilege of leading, our education courses are naturally going to engage students around conversations about race, gender, class, as our students prepare to become teachers, counselors, leaders in schools that serve students from diverse backgrounds. And so we're going to continue to have those conversations because we know they're critical, right, to ensuring we have great teachers and leaders and counselors in every single school. And, again, to go back to what I said at the beginning, this is not about indoctrination or telling our students what to think, right? No faculty member is trying to say you need to think this certain way, right? It's about giving them the frameworks, the analytical skills and approaches to understand complex and diverse systems, right? And to be able to have an impact within those, and for teachers to be able to, make connections and foster that sense of belonging and all of those things that Dr. White and I spoke about at the beginning. Good teaching means preparing students for the world they live in and that they're going to live in as it continues to change. And that means a diverse system, a diverse world, whether we want to acknowledge that or not. And so I think that's important, and that's going to stay, those principles around belonging and preparing every student is going to stay at the center of our programs and our work in the classrooms.
Are there other programs being impacted across the state in our schools impacted by these federal policies eliminating DEI? I guess I've heard from school boards that they're able to continue to provide equality, but not equity, which is the difference in how they are delivering instruction and specialized services to students this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think, certainly in the environment in which we live, there are programs at risk. Oftentimes those programs are ones that are focused on belonging and mentorship and, fostering retention and relationships, particularly for students who come from, historically underserved backgrounds, right? And so, at Drake, though, we've seen how programs like we have a program called Crew Scholars and an initiative called Bulldogs Belong. And they truly are designed to support all students, emphasizing these components of leadership, mentorship, community, as Dr. White said with her program, right? It's not designed to turn people away or to exclude, right? And so I think that part of the challenge here is sometimes in the current environment, we can get discouraged, or universities, might eliminate programs. We've seen nationally in the higher ed space, universities closing diversity offices, cutting back cultural centers, eliminating staff positions, and sometimes even these, broad mentorship and leadership opportunities are reduced. And you spoke about, some of the things in the K-12 space, right? That focused on maybe even cultural celebrations or professional development, even supporting English language learners, right? Even though our English language learning population continues to grow. And so I think it's important that, when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, whatever word we want to use, I think, again, it's about what are those supports that all students need to really reach high expectations and to persist in school, to graduate, and then be successful beyond school as well.
Could this impact? I see Iowa schools trying to create diversity in their classrooms by trying to foster and bring in teachers of color so that the students they teach see themselves represented. How could this have a cooling effect on those sorts of programs and those efforts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, of course, it gets back to a few things. Every institution, K-12, higher ed, right? I think we're committed to following the law, right? So ensuring that we are in compliance with all state and federal regulations. And at the same time, as I said, and Dr. White said in the beginning, when we talked about diversity, right, it's having lots of people who come in from different perspectives, have different viewpoints, different backgrounds. And so we'll certainly continue to encourage that, and I think schools and higher ed, when they're building their hiring pools, right, going out and telling people about opportunities to come work in their system, will continue to hopefully cast that net broadly, while also staying in compliance when it comes to, to hiring and all of those things. So certainly, yes, I think you use the term chilling effect. I mean, everyone does want to approach hiring particularly thoughtfully and carefully. And at the same time, I still think there are ways to, get the message out that diverse perspectives, backgrounds are welcome and important in this work as well.
Mm-hmm. Could we expand on how programs that kind of foster diversity, equity, and inclusion help create safety for students, help them meet their needs, create this sense of belonging and support for them as they learn through the K through higher education system?
Well, certainly, and I'll speak again from my experience as a high school teacher and from the perspective offered by the Academy. When when students are in these programs, they see each other achieving and to some degree excelling. And when they see their peers excelling, they see that it's possible for them. The idea of having a teacher who looks like you is important because, again, it shows you talk about reflection, it shows the student that the person in charge of the classroom has the wherewithal to teach just like anybody else does. And so, for example, when I was teaching, my students who were not of color, that was the vast majority of them, said to me after they had graduated and gone on and become adults that the class that I taught was most intriguing, most interesting, and that they learned, I will say the most that they'd learned from any class, but that would be overstating. But they realized that they were special to some degree because they had a teacher who looked like me. And I was the exception in our faculty. So I wasn't the only Black teacher on the faculty, but I was the only Black English teacher. And so students who chose to take my class got an experience different from that in other classes. So it works both ways. The students who are in the majority get a new and renewed experience. The students who are in the minority get the same thing. So I believe that it's important to try to diversify staff as well as students when we're talking about the benefits of teaching, because the world is diverse. And so if you have come from a class where, or a city or a town where there is no diversity, then in order to catch up, you have to hopefully come into contact with someone who is not like you. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, I so agree with that, Dr. White. You know, my own two children, one's a graduate of Des Moines Public Schools and one's a junior at Roosevelt High School. And I think, you know, they benefit, right? All kids benefit when they have a diversity of perspectives and experiences and backgrounds up in front of the classroom or on the court or the field, right? Leading and working with them. And I can speak to that, you know, from my own background. I grew up in a not diverse community at all in rural South Dakota. And my first teaching job was in Tunica, Mississippi, in the Mississippi Delta.
Oh, heavens.
And a long time ago, as you would say, right, in the last century. And, you know, all of my students were African-American. I was one of 3 white teachers in the building, right? And I think having that experience as my first professional experience in my career has really grounded me in that importance, right? Of being able to have all of these perspectives and to really learn and be part of a community, right? And I think you used in your question, you know, the word safety, right, Grace? Like it's about not just physical safety, but, you know, the academic, the emotional, all those supports, right, that come into the classroom. And so to be able to foster in our students, in future teachers, in current teachers, right? Just that ability to listen and to understand and to engage, I think makes us all better, right? And so having people of diverse backgrounds in community together, I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope to see more of that in Iowa, but it's hard to create those spaces, especially since, as we've stated a lot, that Iowa is so white. I feel like a lot of these DEI initiatives, just from like an outside perspective looking in, were created out of the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020. And now it feels like those are what is being rolled back. Can either of you speak to that perspective? Did those, DEI initiatives help improve the sense of belonging for students, create more equity for them, or was it showier than that?
Well, it was certainly showy. It certainly resonated across the country, and there were tangible results as people responded to the murder of George Floyd. So, to the degree to which DEI initiatives came out of that, I'd say fine and dandy. I personally would appreciate DEI appearing or more organically. It's not something that needs to be spurred on or catapulted by a tragedy. And as you know, the DEI fervor died down well before these strictures were put on programs. So where they were needed, then certainly let's have something that calls out the need for diversity, that calls out the need for inclusion, that calls out the need for equity. But if we are well educated in the first place, and if we are thinkers, and if we know our history, then we know that those things should be in place anyway. And if they're not, then I think we need an artificial way of putting them in place. And I use the word artificial advisedly. So, my perspective as a Black woman, a Black educator, is different, I think, probably from that of somebody who's not, because the history is different. And to the degree to which the history has not been taught on an equitable basis, then, that skews a person's perspective. And we often presume that those perspectives are tied to race. They may be, but we need to allow for, I think, the fact that we have grown up in different silos, and that our experiences are therefore connected to that, to the way in which we were raised and educated. So, Tunica, Mississippi, for example, if you talk about diversity initiatives in Tunica, in your school is 99 and 9/10% Black, which my high school was, in my first experience at Roosevelt High School in Gary, Indiana, 99 and 9/10% Black. The idea of diversity and inclusion would be met with a different response, I think, than it would be if we're talking about Des Moines, Iowa, or Cedar Rapids, Iowa. So the people that I've spoken with have said, if you are in a school that has a majority minority population or a diverse population, then the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion is minimized. If you are in a school that has a small minority population, then you need to take account. You need to think about why diversity is important. You need to put in place strategies that would help those kinds of things along, so that they can grow and become organic, become part of the school culture. So I think that to circle back around, the murder of George Floyd did bring into sharp relief the need for something to happen in our culture, because we were, we said, this can't go on. This can't keep happening. So the advent of diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies, I think, emerged from that. I won't repeat myself, but I think that the organic way is better.
Do we ever get to a place where we don't need to talk about DEI specifically? I don't know if that's a wild question.
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead, Dr.
Yeah.
White.
No, you. I wish it were so, but I don't think so. I mean, I think that we've gotten close in our evolution as a society to a place where the idea of equity, the idea of let's call it integration, to use an antiquated term, was becoming accepted or acceptable in large part across the country. But history did a 180 on us, and so now we're in a situation where things that had been carefully put into place due to the blood, sweat, and tears of many people, Black and white alike, have been taken away. So now we're kind of back to the beginning, and I guess when the pendulum swings back the other way, which it will, we'll be looking at, replacing what has been taken away. So I don't know whether we'll be able to avoid talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the near future, unless we just capitulate to the powers that are and say, well, those things don't matter, they're not important, so we won't talk about them.
Yeah, I think, from my perspective, I mean, I think this will continue to be an important conversation, and I hope we get a little bit away from, you use the phrase, Dr. White, knee-jerk reactions earlier, right? Of like, ooh, I hear this word, and then have all these misperceptions, right, about what it really means when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And and it goes beyond. I know we've talked a lot about, as it relates to race. It also, there's lots of dimensions of difference, right? That we want to ensure all students, regardless of, abilities or disabilities, gender, sexual orientation, right? All of these things that make us unique individuals, right? And so how do we move it from a polarizing knee-jerk reaction conversation around 3 words that have come to mean thousands of different things depending on the audience, to really about every individual feeling like they belong where they are, they've got the supports they need to be successful, and they have people who care about them, right? And so that, I think, is where I hope we go, right? We don't lose sight of all those things that Dr. White said are really important, right? To ensure all people are on a level playing field. And at the same time, we're just going to have to continue to evolve the conversation so that everyone feels welcome into it and knows, what we're talking about. And that's success for everyone. And particularly given this is an education session, right? Success for students.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to the beginning of our conversation where you were talking, Dr. White, about your role as an academic advisor. How did that role come about? Do you think it would be something that would be allowed under today's policies?
Probably not allowed. It was the brainchild of my principal, who was a data guy, and he kept track of, how many students of different types and different persuasions were among the student body and how they were doing. What kinds of co-curricular activities they were involved in, how they were doing academically, what kind of courses they were taking, whether or not they had a postgraduate plan, all of that kind of thing. He was interested in. And so when he started at Washington, he asked me, I was coming back to Washington, and he asked me if I would like to be academic advisor to minority students. And I said, I do not know. What is that? And he said, I don't know. We'll work on it together. So it was something that he, had in his head that needed to happen. And he asked me if I would do it. And so it kind of evolved as as I started to do it. And, you know, I then fold in this and fold in that. And, you know, as I think I did that job for about 10 years. And I will say that my principal was better than anybody I've ever seen at getting people to do 2 or 3 jobs for one salary. And so I was teaching half-time and doing this job, academic advising half-time. So, you know, it was, I would call it a success, because not only was I tracking students, I was also talking to students individually, not just Black students, but all minority students, including exchange students and including, you know, immigrant students. And at that time, the immigrant population was Vietnamese. And as a result, I learned a lot. And we decided as a school community to showcase the various cultures that we had at Washington. And I think there were over 20. And so we had a fashion show, and we had a food fair, and we had, you know, all kinds of things like that that were very colorful and non-threatening and educational overall, school-wide. And that was it was a lot of fun and very educational at the same time. So that is what I did as academic advisor to minority students. And when I left, I was very fearful that, as you know, when you leave a job at which you've made some inroads and some advancements, you fear that your absence will mean the end of those programs. I liken it to a ship, you know, and when the wake of the ship has smoothed out, then it's just like you hadn't been there at all. I was afraid of that. And in fact, for a couple of years after I left, those programs did survive. They're not there anymore. Mm-hmm. And I think it's to the detriment of everybody involved, not because of me, but because of the concepts that, you know, we were able to put forward, and that students accepted because they learned about them, not because they had to, but because it was part of our school community.
Yeah. I hear, did these DEI programs kind of help bolster students of color academic achievement? And are you worried about that backsliding because of rollback of DEI programs?
Well, you know, I don't. Let me back up a little bit. I think that what I did as academic advisor to minority students and what that program is an example of DEI in its organic form, right? You know, it's not that it just happened, but the way in which it happened was not offensive to anybody. It was not threatening to anybody. It was not, you know, anything that anybody had to object to. So if those kinds of programs could return, I think we'd all be better off. Whether or not the idea of academic advisors to minority students or DEI programs will ever return is anybody's guess. But if I had to guess, I would say they have gone the way of the dodo bird.
Well, and Dr. White, you know, hearing you talk about your experience, I mean, what, you know, stood out for me in there, you use the word organic, right? And the like the relationships I could hear you talking about when you spoke. I think about, you know, one of my, I don't know, mentors, role models, idols here at Drake is a woman named Wanda Everidge. And Wanda was the associate principal at Des Moines Roosevelt High School for many years, and then the associate provost here at Drake before I got here. And she's retired, African-American woman, and had a tremendous impact here. I think, you know, particularly for students she shared backgrounds with, but for all students, right? Because she built those relationships. And even though Wanda's retired, we do every summer, we host in the School of Education, the Wanda E. Everidge Academic Success Symposium. And and this is not a DEI, initiative. It's about relationships, sense of belonging, all of those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I feel very fortunate to be in an institution where, diversity and all of this work is woven into our mission and our approach, and that we can carry these things on, right, beyond the time of any individual. But that organic approach, that really getting to know people and building those relationships, and seeing Wanda come back every summer and work with high school students is just, it warms my heart, because she builds those relationships, and regardless of what the student's background is, right? That's why all students benefit from things like this. And so I think that's what's really important to me.
Agreed.
With our last few minutes here, I just want to remind our audience, if you have any questions, please pop those into the chat. I want to go back to that student achievement piece, though, that I asked about earlier. Are you worried about student achievement of students of color, of Black students? Historically, in our communities in Iowa, it has been less than their white counterparts. So how do we continue to help those students excel without programs specifically designed, specifically geared towards them? Are those needed still?
I would say they are needed. Again, I go back to the organic, use that phrase, because I think that I think it goes back to leadership in a school setting. I think that if students believe that they can achieve, then they will achieve. Our programs certainly do focus on students' sense of confidence, students' critical thinking skills, students' ability to express themselves. And sometimes they come to us having not had experience in those realms. And so what we provide for them is, or encourage them to take advantage of, is those kinds of higher level thinking skills, period. And so if there's no effort in that arena, if there's nobody who recognize a student's need or a student's ability, then I wouldn't be surprised if we would see some backsliding. I don't want to be the crepe hanger here, but I think that, students who come from sometimes disadvantaged backgrounds economically, but who are still quite bright and capable, may not get that kind of push from home, whereas students who are from economically advantaged households will get those kinds of experiences. Travel, for example, it's the great equalizer. And the students that we take to various places around the country have never been to those places before. And so I'm not sure which play this is from, but the phrase "attention must be paid" is in my head. And so I think that that's what I'm talking about. Attention must be paid to all students. And when you pay attention to all students, some students are going to come to the forefront as needing more remediation in some cases and encouragement in other cases. And if you presume that all students are on the same level, then that's not equity. And of course, teachers have jobs to do that are harder than they were when I was teaching. But that's part of what teaching has become now. You need to figure out which students need to be encouraged, which students need to be remediated. And remediation doesn't always mean special ed, and encouragement doesn't always mean AP. But there needs to be an attempt to find students where they are and to push them forward.
I would agree. And, I think there's no avoiding in Iowa specifically and nationally, we have really pernicious gaps in achievement. along racial lines, right? And it goes beyond that. As Dr. White said, for students who come from a low income background, or students who have a disability, students who are English language learners, we see lots of gaps that we need to remain focused on closing. And at the same time, sitting here as the dean of a school of education, right, I'm really focused on ensuring we're preparing outstanding teachers and Dr. White, you said leaders of buildings, right? Principals, superintendents, district office administrators, really focused on ensuring that all kids have the supports they need and are successful, whether that mean targeted programs or approaches in the classroom, right, that we know lead to stronger student learning and student outcomes. So I think it's all of that, right, is in the mix as we talk about ensuring all students in Iowa are successful.
We have a comment from our audience that your quote, Dr. White, is from Death of a Salesman.
Thank you. Listen, there's a time when I would have been able to tell you that, but I've been out of the classroom for a minute. And I find myself thinking about lines from poetry and think, oh boy, I know who that poet was. Who was it? And if I think about it long enough, sometimes it will bubble up. But thank you to whoever gave me that reference. I appreciate it.
Well, I think we're about to wrap up here. Do you guys have any last thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
Only that thank you for having this session. I believe that this discussion is important now in more ways now than it has been in the past. And so I think we were able to get at some crucial questions without crossing any lines or raising any red flags. And I think that is an accomplishment of you, Grace, and of us as well. So I'm really appreciative of the conversation. It needs to be had. People should not shy away from talking about these issues, even though we're in the environment that we're in now. I think that talking about them will only help, and being quiet, silent about them can only hurt.
I would agree. I appreciate this conversation. It's been, great, Dr. White, listening to your stories and perspective, and thank you for the questions, Grace. I think it reinforces for me that, education is a human enterprise, right? It's about those relationships. It's about creating connections. And when students have those connections, when they have that sense of belonging, they thrive, right? And that's why this work matters. And so the question isn't about DEI as 3 letters and whether it exists or not. It's about, do our students feel safe? Do they feel supported? And are they prepared for the world in which they're entering? Exactly. That's what it comes down to. And I think we've seen, what works and what helps build those connections and those relationships and, that sense of belonging that allows them to succeed. So I think that's what's really important here. And I just appreciate conversations like these that allow us to talk about those things.
Well, thank you for joining us today. Thanks to our presenting sponsor, ITC Midwest, for their support. And thank you to our panelists. Thank you guys for your insight and expertise. And to our audience for tuning in. So have a great Iowa Ideas.